So we get a lot of questions where in Massachusetts, you take a breathalyzer, but that actually is converted to a blood alcohol sample. So how does that really work? Well, it's a little bit confusing in terms of how the technology actually works, right? Because in Massachusetts, you can't draw someone's blood unless they consent or you have a search warrant to do so. So in the majority of cases, you really don't have any type of actual blood that they're actually measuring to see the blood alcohol level in it. Instead, they have something like a machine called an breathalyzer. So the machine itself takes supposedly deep lung samples when you blow through it, and you're supposed to take multiple samples too. And what happens in that situation is it then converts it to a blood alcohol result, right? So it's a little bit weird in terms of the way it works because you're not actually drawing someone's blood, but they believe that the process that they go through does essentially measure deep lung air and not the alcohol that's actually in a person's mouth. So there's a bunch of regulations that they're supposed to go by to make sure that this process is done correctly, the machine is working correctly, so that you get essentially an accurate result. When you actually take the breathalyzer, what ends up happening is that they will flush the system when you're standing there. They'll hand you a tube, and you're supposed to blow in the tube for a certain period of time until the machine beeps. The idea is that the deep lung air from the deep lungs and not from your mouth is supposed to be measured through this machine itself. Then what happens is they're supposed to hit a button, and then they flush the machine with air, and then the next point is they essentially test a sample size of an alcohol solution to make sure that that is working correctly between the two samples that you make. Then they flush the system again, and then you essentially blow into the machine the second time, and then those two test samples that you give have to be within a certain scientific deviation of error just to make sure that the machine is working correctly. So that's essentially how it works. But what was going on during these breathalyzer challenge was it wasn't really during people's particular tests that was really the hot button issue of contention, even though there was some issues in terms of some false tests that were essentially made and some errors in the testing that ended up not showing up on some of the reports. But the bigger issue was that these periodic tests, essentially these machines being tested ever so often to make sure that they're being correctly updated, correctly cared for, essentially weren't really testing within the regulations. So as a result, it led to a long moratorium of not being able to use breathalyzers in the Commonwealth. But they are back now. So the most important thing though is always drive carefully, never drink and drive. But if you find yourself in this unfortunate situation, you certainly want to talk to a lawyer as soon as you can.